My son refused to pay $30,000 to save my life, telling me he didn't have the money, that he couldn't work miracles. 6 months later, he spent $250,000 on my daughter-in-law's extravagant wedding with 500 guests. Years later, they showed up desperate at my house, begging for help. I closed the door, and I've never regretted it. Before we continue, first let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Mariah from New York. Thank you for being part of our family. Now let me tell everything. The champagne glass slipped from my hand in slow motion, shattering across the marble floor of Nathan's penthouse. Crystal shards scattered like tiny diamonds under the chandelier light, and the golden liquid spread across the white tiles in an expanding pool. But it wasn't the glass breaking that made the room of 60 people freeze mid-conversation. It was me, crumpling beside it, my screams tearing through the carefully curated atmosphere of wealth and sophistication. Mom! Nathan's voice seemed to come from underwater, distorted and distant. Someone call 911. Victoria appeared above me, her 6-inch Louboutins clicking against the marble as she stepped carefully around the champagne puddle. Her perfectly manicured hand, those nails cost more than my monthly rent, covered her mouth. But it wasn't concern I saw flickering in those cold blue eyes. It was disgust. Annoyance. I was ruining her engagement party, staining her perfect evening with my pain. My name is Margaret, though everyone who truly knows me calls me Maggie. I'm 64 years old, and that night, September 15th, the night of my son's engagement celebration in his $3 million downtown penthouse, was supposed to be one of the happiest nights of my life. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare that would strip away every illusion I'd ever held about motherhood, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Let me take you back 6 hours earlier, to when the evening still held promise. I'd spent the entire day preparing for the party. My hands, weathered from decades of cleaning houses and taking in sewing work, trembled as I wrapped the gift I'd bought for Nathan and Victoria, a vintage photo album I'd found at an estate sale, bound in leather with gold leaf edges. Inside, I'd carefully arranged photos of Nathan's childhood, his first day of school, his graduation, his father holding him as a baby. Thomas had died when Nathan was only 9, a sudden aneurysm that left us with nothing but debt and each other. The album had cost me $200, which meant I'd be eating rice and beans for the next month. But I wanted to give them something meaningful, something that showed Victoria where Nathan came from, the love that had shaped him. Dorothy, my neighbor and only real friend, had helped me get ready. She'd insisted on doing my hair, pinning my grey curls into something resembling elegance, and she'd lent me a dress she swore looked expensive even though we'd both bought it at Goodwill. "You look beautiful, Maggie," said, squeezing my shoulders as I stared at myself in her bathroom mirror. At 68, had become the sister I'd never had, the family that understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for children who grew up to barely remember your name. "I look old," I replied, touching the deep lines around my eyes. "Victoria's mother will be there. Have you seen her? She looks like she's 40, not 62. Plastic surgery and Botox," sniffed. "You've got something better. Character. Authenticity. Real life written on your face." "Real poverty, you mean?" "Stop it." Turned me to face her. "Nathan loves you. This is going to be a wonderful evening. You're going to meet Victoria's family, they're going to see what an amazing woman raised their future son-in-law, and everything will be fine." How wrong she was. Nathan's penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor of the Grandview Towers, the most exclusive building in the city. The doorman had looked me up and down when I arrived, his expression making it clear that women in Goodwill dresses didn't typically enter through his gleaming brass doors. But I'd held my head high, clutching my carefully wrapped gift, and given him Nathan's name. The elevator ride up had felt like ascending into another world. 40 floors above the city where I lived in my one-bedroom apartment with a leaking ceiling and broken heater, where sirens wailed at night and my neighbors fought through paper-thin walls. Up here, there was only silence, luxury, the scent of money so thick you could taste it. When the elevator doors opened directly into Nathan's apartment, because of course he had a private elevator, I'd stepped into what looked like a magazine spread. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering city skyline. Modern art that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life hung on walls painted in designer shades of grey and cream. Servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked too beautiful to eat. And the people. Oh, the people. They moved through the space like a different species. Confident, polished, draped in designer labels I recognized from magazines but had never touched. The women had that particular glow that comes from regular spa treatments, personal trainers, and never having worried about money in their entire lives. The men wore suits that cost more than my car, speaking in low voices about stocks and vacation homes and business deals. I stood frozen just outside the elevator, suddenly feeling like an imposter, a fraud who'd somehow sneaked past security. "Mom." Nathan's voice cut through my paralysis. He appeared through the crowd, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored navy suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile bright and confident. This was my son, my baby boy, but he looked like a stranger, like someone who'd stepped out of a cologne advertisement. He hugged me, and for a moment, I was transported back to when he was small, when he'd run to me after school and wrap his arms around my waist, chattering about his day. But this hug was brief, almost perfunctory, and when he pulled away, I saw him glance around to see who was watching. "You look great," he said, but his eyes were already scanning the room, searching for more important guests. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." He guided me through the crowd with his hand on my elbow, moving quickly, clearly wanting to get the introductions over with. First was his boss, Marcus Sterling, a silver-haired man with eyes like a shark. "So you're Nathan's mother," Marcus said, shaking my hand limply. "Nathan's told me so much about you." "He has?" I asked, pleased and surprised. "Yes, he mentioned you worked several jobs to put him through school. Quite remarkable." The way he said it made it sound like I'd done something quaint and slightly embarrassing, like entering a pie baking contest at a county fair. "I did what any mother would do," I replied, feeling my cheeks heat. Marcus had already turned his attention back to Nathan. "We need to talk about the Henderson account before Monday." And just like that, I was dismissed. Nathan gave me an apologetic smile and let himself be pulled away, leaving me standing alone in a sea of strangers. I made my way to the edge of the room, finding a spot near the windows where I could observe without being observed. Below, the city sparkled like scattered jewels. Somewhere down there was my neighborhood, my tiny apartment, my real life. Up here felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. "You must be Margaret." I turned to find a woman who could only be Victoria's mother. She was tall, slender, with blonde hair in a perfect chignon and a face that defied age through what must have been a team of cosmetic surgeons. Her dress probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and her jewelry, real diamonds, real pearls, caught the light with every tiny movement. "Yes," I said, extending my hand. "And you must be Constance Ashworth." She took my hand briefly, her grip cold and limp. "Victoria's mother. I've been eager to meet you." There was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. Not warmth. Not welcome. Something else. "Nathan is a wonderful young man," Constance continued, her eyes traveling over my dress, my shoes, my simple silver necklace, the only piece of jewelry I owned, a gift from Thomas on our 10th anniversary. "Victoria is quite taken with him. Though I'll admit, when she first brought him home, we were curious about his background." "His background?" I repeated carefully. "Well, you know, where he came from. His upbringing." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Not everyone in Victoria's circle had such a humble beginning. But Nathan has done remarkably well for himself, hasn't he? He's almost completely shed his past. The insult was delivered so smoothly, wrapped in such pleasant tones, that for a moment I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. Almost completely shed his past. As if his past, as if I, were something shameful to be discarded. "I'm proud of everything Nathan has accomplished," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "And I'm proud of the values I taught him. Hard work, integrity, loyalty." "Oh, of course," Constance agreed, her tone suggesting she thought these were cute but ultimately unimportant qualities. Those working-class values have their place. Though now that Nathan is joining our family, he'll need to adapt to different standards. Different expectations. Before I could respond, Victoria herself appeared, gliding toward us in a dress that probably cost more than my car. She was beautiful in that particular way wealthy people are beautiful. Polished, perfected, every hair in place, every eyelash perfectly curled. But her beauty felt manufactured, artificial, like a doll in an expensive store window. "Mother," Victoria said, linking arms with Constance. Then, as an afterthought, "Margaret. I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. "Your home is beautiful." "Nathan's home," Victoria corrected with a small smile. "Though I've been helping him redecorate. His taste when I met him was a bit pedestrian. All that furniture from chain stores." She laughed, a tinkling sound that made me think of breaking glass. "But we're fixing that. We're fixing that." As if Nathan were a project, something to be renovated and improved. "I brought you a gift," I said, retrieving the wrapped album from my purse. "Something for both of you." Victoria took it with evident reluctance, as if I'd handed her a bag of garbage. "Oh, how thoughtful. I'll just put this with the others." She handed it off to a passing server without even looking at it, and I watched my $200, my month of rice and beans, disappear into a mountain of gifts that probably included crystal vases and designer kitchen appliances and things worth more than everything I owned combined. "Now," Constance said, her hand on Victoria's arm, "we should introduce you to the Hendersons. They're dying to meet you, darling." And just like that, they swept away, leaving me alone again. The evening continued in this vein. Nathan was always across the room, always surrounded by colleagues and Victoria's friends, always too busy to spend more than 30 seconds with me. When I tried to join conversations, I found myself unable to contribute. They discussed restaurants I'd never been to, vacation destinations I'd only seen on television, cultural events that required tickets I could never afford. I was a foreigner in my own son's life. I retreated to the bathroom at one point, locking myself in the marble and gold sanctuary, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed small, faded, insignificant. The careful hair Dot had styled was already coming loose. The Goodwill dress looked exactly like what it was under these bright lights. I could see every wrinkle, every age spot, every sign that I didn't belong here. "Pull yourself together," I told myself. "This is Nathan's moment. His happiness. Stop being selfish." When I emerged, determined to make the best of the evening, I found Victoria holding court near the windows, surrounded by her friends. I was about to turn away when I heard my name. "Nathan's mother," Victoria was saying in a low voice, but not low enough. "She's sweet, I suppose, but honestly, she's a bit of an embarrassment. Did you see what she's wearing?" The circle of women laughed, and I froze in the hallway, hidden by a decorative column. "Nathan said she used to clean houses," one of the women replied. "Can you imagine? Your mother-in-law scrubbing toilets." "Well, she won't be doing that anymore once we're married," Victoria said firmly. "I've already told Nathan that we'll be keeping family visits to a minimum. Maybe Christmas and birthday phone calls. I'm not having her show up at our dinner parties in clothes from Goodwill." More laughter. My face burned, and tears pricked at my eyes. But what came next was worse. "The wedding is going to be spectacular," Victoria continued, her voice rising with excitement. "We've already booked the Rosewood estate. You know, that venue that's $150,000 just for the space rental? And Mother has hired Celestine D'Amour to design my dress. She's flown in from Paris. The dress alone will be $40,000. God, I'm so jealous," one of the women gushed. "What's your total budget?" "Well, Daddy said not to worry about costs. He wants this to be the wedding of the century. We're looking at around $250,000, probably more. But you only get married once, right? At least, I plan to only marry once." She paused. "To someone worthy of the Ashworth name. $250,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $250,000 for one day, one party. I thought of my apartment, my leaking ceiling, the way I counted pennies at the grocery store. I thought of the times I'd skipped meals so Nathan could have seconds as a child. I thought of the year I'd worked 4 jobs simultaneously, sleeping only a few hours a night, so he could go to that expensive summer camp all his friends were attending. $250,000 for a wedding, while I was worried about having enough money for my blood pressure medication. I turned to leave, to escape, to go home where I belonged. But that's when I saw the stairs, a decorative spiral staircase leading up to what Nathan had told me was a library loft. I'd always loved books, and the thought of a quiet space away from the cruel laughter, the casual cruelty, was overwhelmingly appealing. The stairs were metal, modern, with open treads. Beautiful but impractical, especially in the dim lighting. I was halfway up when my foot, tired and uncertain in the unfamiliar shoes Dot had lent me, caught on the edge of a step. I fell backward, my arms windmilling uselessly, a scream tearing from my throat. The world spun, lights, faces, the glittering city beyond the windows all blurring together. I hit the marble floor with a crack that seemed to echo through my entire body, pain exploding through my spine, my ribs, my head. And that's when the champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered beside me, and Nathan's voice was calling my name, and Victoria was standing above me with disgust in her eyes, and I realized that this evening wasn't the beginning of anything beautiful. It was the beginning of the end. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and pain and paramedics speaking in urgent tones. Nathan had ridden with me, holding my hand, his face pale with what I wanted to believe was concern. But even through the haze of agony, I noticed how often he checked his phone, how his jaw tightened with frustration when the paramedic told him he needed to put it away. At the hospital, they rushed me into imaging. X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, machines that whirred and clicked while I lay perfectly still, biting back screams as pain radiated through my body. Nathan waited outside, pacing, still checking his phone. Dr. Chen, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, finally came to speak with us. She had the kind of face that had seen too much suffering, too many families getting bad news. She pulled up images on her tablet, showing us pictures of my spine that looked like abstract art. "Mrs. Morrison," she began, her voice gentle but direct. "You have 3 fractured vertebrae in your lower back, L3, L4, and L5. You've also sustained significant nerve damage from the impact. Without surgery, the prognosis is not good." "What does not good mean?" Nathan asked, his voice tight. "It means your mother will likely lose mobility over time. The fractures are unstable, and they're pressing on the spinal cord. She's at risk of permanent paralysis if we don't intervene soon. She'll also experience chronic, severe pain that will significantly impact her quality of life." "But with surgery?" I managed to ask through clenched teeth. "With surgery, we can stabilize the vertebrae, decompress the spinal cord, and repair most of the damage. You'll need physical therapy, and you'll likely have some permanent limitations, but you should be able to walk, live independently, manage your pain. Without surgery." She shook her head. "You're looking at a wheelchair within 6 months, possibly sooner." The room seemed to tilt. I'd always been independent, always worked, always taken care of myself. The thought of being unable to walk, of being dependent on others, was more terrifying than the pain itself. "How soon does she need this surgery?" Nathan asked. "Ideally within the next 2 weeks. The longer we wait, the more permanent damage occurs. After a month, surgery becomes less effective." "And the cost?" Nathan's voice had changed, become more businesslike. Dr. Chen glanced at me apologetically. "With Mrs. Morrison's insurance, her out-of-pocket cost will be approximately $30,000. I know that's a significant amount." $30,000, Nathan repeated, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "There are payment plans," Dr. Chen continued. "Financial assistance programs. Our social worker can help you navigate the options." "Okay," Nathan said, but he was looking at his phone again, not at me. "Okay. We'll figure something out." Dr. Chen prescribed pain medication and admitted me overnight for observation. They put me in a shared room with a woman who snored like a freight train and had the television turned up to maximum volume. Nathan stayed for maybe 20 minutes, promising he'd be back in the morning, and then he was gone, leaving me alone with my pain and my fear and the terrible knowledge that something had shifted in the air between us. I didn't sleep that night. The pain medication barely touched the agony radiating through my back and legs. But worse than the physical pain was the memory of Nathan's face when Dr. Chen had mentioned the cost. That flash of something I'd never seen directed at me before, resentment. The next morning, Dot arrived before Nathan did. She'd taken 2 buses to get to the hospital, bringing me a bag with clean clothes, toiletries, and a thermos of her homemade chicken soup. She took one look at me and burst into tears. "Oh, Maggie," she said, pulling a chair close to my bed and taking my hand. "They called me last night after they brought you in. I wanted to come immediately, but the buses don't run after midnight. How bad is it?" I told her everything. The fall, the diagnosis, the surgery I needed, the cost. When I mentioned the $30,000, she went pale. "Do you have savings?" she asked, though we both knew the answer. "I have about $3,000. From Thomas's life insurance. I've been saving it for emergencies." I laughed bitterly. "I guess this qualifies." "What did Nathan say?" "Surely he'll help. He said we'd figure something out." "But Dot, you should have seen his face when they mentioned the cost. It was like I was asking him to buy me a luxury vacation instead of asking for my life." "He's just in shock," Dot insisted. "Nathan's a good boy. He'll do the right thing." But when Nathan arrived an hour later, I could see immediately that something was wrong. He looked exhausted, his suit rumpled, his hair disheveled. And he couldn't meet my eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked, standing awkwardly at the foot of my bed. "The same. In pain. Scared." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Did you talk to anyone about the surgery? About the costs?" Nathan shifted his weight, crossed his arms, uncrossed them. "Mom, we need to talk about this. About what's realistic." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean $30,000 is a lot of money. It's not like I can just pull that out of thin air." "But you have money," I said, confusion mixing with my fear. "You have this high-paying job, that penthouse." "That penthouse has a mortgage, Mom. A huge mortgage. And I have other expenses. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain that lifestyle? The car payments, the club memberships Victoria expects, the clothes, the dinners, He stopped himself, seeming to realize how this sounded. "I'm not asking you to maintain a lifestyle," I said, my voice rising. "I'm asking you to help me walk. To save me from being paralyzed." "I understand that, but..." "But what? Tell me what's more important than your mother's ability to walk." Nathan's face flushed. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Victoria's family has certain expectations. We're planning this wedding. The $250,000 wedding." I interrupted. "I heard Victoria talking about it. At your party, right before I fell." He had the grace to look ashamed. "That's different. That's an investment in our future. Her father has business connections that could..." "I don't need a lecture on business connections." I was shouting now, and Dot was squeezing my hand, trying to calm me, but I couldn't stop. "I need surgery. I need your help. I'm your mother, Nathan. I sacrificed everything for you. Everything. I worked myself to the bone so you could have opportunities. So you could become this successful man in his expensive suit with his expensive life. And now you're telling me that spending $30,000 to keep me from being paralyzed is too much to ask." "Mom, please, you're overreacting." "Overreacting? I'm lying in a hospital bed with a broken back." "I know, and I'm sorry that happened, but you have to understand my position. I'm about to get married. Victoria and I are building a life together. We can't just derail all our plans because..." "Because what? Because your mother is an inconvenience." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't care. "You know what the worst part is? It's not that you don't have the money. You clearly do. The penthouse, the car, the wedding. The worst part is that you don't think I'm worth it. That's not fair, Nathan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. No, what's not fair is that I spent 30 years putting you first, and you can't spend $1 to save me. I turned my face away from him. Get out. Mom. Get out. Just go back to Victoria and your perfect life and your $250,000 wedding. Forget you ever had a mother. He stood there for a moment longer, and I could feel him struggling with something. Part of me hoped desperately that he would change his mind, that he would sit down and apologize and promise to help. That the son I'd raised would appear from behind this cold stranger's mask. Instead, he said quietly, "I'll come back when you've calmed down," and walked out. Dot held me while I sobbed, my body shaking with pain and heartbreak. "He'll come back," she kept saying. "He'll realize he's wrong. He'll come back." But he didn't. Not that day. Not the next day. Not ever. Dr. Chen came to see me on my third day in the hospital. I was being discharged, the insurance would only cover so much observation time, and we needed to discuss my options. "I can't afford the surgery," I told her bluntly. "My son won't help, and I have $3,000 to my name. So what do I do? What happens to me?" She sat down heavily in the visitor's chair, and I saw genuine sadness in her eyes. "We'll get you set up with the strongest pain medication your insurance covers. You'll need a wheelchair. We can arrange that through medical supply. Physical therapy to maintain what mobility you have left, though without the surgery, you'll gradually lose function in your legs. There are support groups, resources for people dealing with chronic pain and disability." "A wheelchair," I interrupted. "I'm going to be in a wheelchair." "Most likely, yes. Within 6 to 8 months." I stared at the ceiling, trying to process this new reality. Everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, had been to give Nathan a better life than mine. And now I was being told that my life would be confined to a wheelchair, that I'd lose my independence, my ability to work, everything that made me feel human. "There is one other option," Dr. Chen said hesitantly. "It's not ideal, but some patients have had success crowdfunding for medical expenses. GoFundMe, that sort of thing. If you can tell your story, sometimes people will donate. Beg strangers on the internet for money." The humiliation of it made me feel sick. While my son spends $250,000 on a wedding. "I understand how difficult this is," Dr. Chen said gently. "But pride won't fix your spine." She was right, of course. So that's what I did. Dot helped me set up the GoFundMe page, took photos of me in the hospital bed, wrote a description that laid out the situation without explicitly naming Nathan, though anyone who knew us would recognize the story. The response was heartbreaking in both senses. Within a week, we'd raised $8,000 from friends, neighbors, former clients whose houses I'd cleaned, people who knew me and wanted to help. It was beautiful and humbling, but it was nowhere near enough. I sold everything I owned that had any value. My car, an old Honda that ran more on prayers than gasoline, but it brought me $2,000. Thomas's watch, his wedding ring, other keepsakes I'd been saving for Nathan, another $1,500. I emptied my savings account, begged for payment plans from the hospital, applied for every medical assistance program that existed. And somehow, after 6 weeks of desperate scrambling, I'd cobbled together $28,000. Still $2,000 short. I swallowed my pride and called Nathan one last time. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail, my voice shaking. "Nathan, it's Mom. I've raised $28,000 for the surgery. I sold everything I own. I asked strangers for help. I just need $2,000 more. Just $2,000, and I can have the surgery, and I won't be paralyzed. Please. I'm begging you. Just $2,000. He never called back. Instead, Dot sold her grandmother's antique ring, the only valuable thing she owned, for $2,500. Dot, no, I protested through tears when she told me. I can't let you do that. It's done, she said firmly. Your surgery is scheduled for next week. You're going to walk again, Maggie. And Nathan. Her face hardened. Nathan is going to have to live with what he's done. The surgery happened on October 15th, exactly 1 month after my fall. Dr. Chen had warned me that waiting so long meant the nerve damage might be more extensive than if we'd operated immediately, that my recovery would be harder, my pain management more complex. But she'd also said we'd caught it just in time, another few weeks and I would have lost my chance entirely. I woke up from anesthesia in a fog of pain and medication, Dot's face swimming above me. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed. "But I can feel my legs. Dot, I can feel my legs." She started crying, and I joined her, both of us weeping with relief and exhaustion and the horrible knowledge that this victory had come at such a steep price. The recovery was brutal. 6 weeks in a rehabilitation facility, learning to walk again, building strength, managing pain that sometimes made me scream into my pillow at night. Physical therapy 3 times a week after I was discharged. Pills in the morning, pills at night. Pills that made me nauseous but kept the pain at a manageable level. I moved back to my apartment in December, 3 months after the fall. It looked different somehow, smaller and emptier. I'd sold so many things to pay for the surgery that whole rooms echoed. No TV, no computer, no car. Just the basics, a bed, a chair, a small table. My clothes. My books. The framed photo of Nathan's graduation that I couldn't bring myself to get rid of. I was alive. I could walk, though with a significant limp and a cane I'd probably need forever. But I was financially destroyed. The GoFundMe money, my savings, Dot's ring, the sale of everything I owned, it had all gone to medical bills, and I still owed the hospital $15,000 that I was paying off at $200 a month. I had to find work. But who hires a 64-year-old woman with a limp and chronic pain? I couldn't clean houses anymore, my back wouldn't allow it. I couldn't stand for long periods. I couldn't lift more than 10 pounds without risking re-injury. I ended up taking in sewing and alterations from home, barely making enough to cover rent and food. Some months I had to choose between pain medication and electricity. I learned to live with pain levels that would have sent me to the emergency room before, simply because I couldn't afford treatment. And through it all, Nathan never called. Not once. Not to ask if I'd survived the surgery. Not to check if I was okay. Not even to wish me a Merry Christmas. I saw the wedding preparations on social media, because apparently someone thought I'd want to see them. Or maybe they wanted me to see them, to rub salt in the wound. Victoria's bridal shower, $15,000 at an exclusive restaurant. The engagement photos, shot on a beach in the Maldives. The dress fittings, the venue tours, the tasting menus at catering companies where a single plate cost more than my weekly food budget. I watched my son prepare to spend $250,000 on one day while I ate ramen noodles and rationed my pain medication. And that's when something inside me broke. Not broke, transformed. Hardened. Crystallized into something new and sharp and unyielding. I stopped crying. I stopped hoping Nathan would realize what he'd done and apologize. I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came. I stopped being the mother who loved unconditionally, who sacrificed endlessly, who forgave everything. I became someone else. Someone who understood that love without boundaries is just another word for exploitation. Someone who knew that some betrayals are too deep to forgive. I became someone who was done being a martyr. I wasn't invited to Nathan's wedding. Let me be clear about that. I received no invitation, no phone call, not even a grudging email. It was as if I'd been erased from his life entirely. But I knew when it was happening. July 14th. The Rosewood Estate. Starting at 4 p.m. Dot found me that morning sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall. "What are you doing today?" she asked, though her tone said she already knew. "Nothing," I replied. "Just like every other day." "Maggie. Don't. Please. I don't want to talk about it." But of course, we did talk about it. We talked about how I was spending the day of my only child's wedding alone in my empty apartment. How I wasn't even worth a courtesy invitation, wasn't even worth the acknowledgement that I existed. How Nathan had chosen to exclude me entirely rather than explain to Victoria's family that his mother was poor and broken and embarrassing. You could show up anyway, Dot suggested. Walk in and make a scene. Tell everyone what he did to you. No, I said firmly. I'm not going to crash my son's wedding like some bitter ex-girlfriend. I have more dignity than that. Then what? You're just going to sit here. I'm going to remember, I said. I'm going to remember every single thing about this day. Because one day, he's going to need me. People like Nathan and Victoria, people who build their lives on money and appearances. When things fall apart, they always come crawling back. And when he does, I want to remember exactly how I spent the day of his wedding. The day passed with excruciating slowness. I knew the schedule from the posts I'd seen online. 4 p.m. ceremony. 6 p.m. cocktail hour. 7 p.m. dinner. 9 p.m. first dance. They'd hired a symphony orchestra for the ceremony and a famous DJ for the reception. The flowers were imported from 3 different countries. The champagne cost $500 per bottle. At 4 p.m., I imagined Nathan standing at the altar in his custom-tailored tuxedo, watching Victoria walk down an aisle carpeted in white rose petals. At 6 p.m., I imagined guests mingling on a terrace overlooking manicured gardens, eating canapés and drinking that expensive champagne. At 7 p.m., I imagined them all seated at tables draped in silk, eating their 7-course meal off gold-rimmed plates. And through it all, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, eating canned soup, my back aching because I'd rationed my pain medication to make it last through the end of the month. Dot stayed with me. She didn't try to cheer me up or convince me that everything would be okay. She just sat there, a solid presence in the darkness, occasionally squeezing my hand. Around 11 p.m., the posts started appearing on social media. Hundreds of photos from hundreds of guests, all documenting the spectacular wedding of Nathan Morrison and Victoria Ashworth. The ceremony that looked like something from a fairy tale. The reception that resembled a royal ball. Victoria in her $40,000 dress that sparkled under the chandeliers. Nathan looking proud and handsome and utterly happy. Not once in any photo did he look like a man who'd abandoned his mother to near paralysis. I scrolled through them all, one by one, memorizing every detail. The ice sculpture that must have cost thousands. The 12-tier cake covered in edible gold. The fireworks display at midnight that probably cost more than my annual income. The gift table overflowing with boxes wrapped in designer paper. I saved every photo to a folder on Dot's phone. Evidence. Proof. Documentation of exactly where Nathan's priorities lay. Why are you torturing yourself? Dot asked. I'm not, I replied. I'm building a case. I'm creating a record. Because someday, he's going to try to rewrite this history. He's going to tell himself a story where he's not the villain. And I need to remember the truth. At 2 a.m., I finally turned off the phone and sat in the darkness of my apartment. Dot had fallen asleep in the chair beside me. Outside, the city continued its restless movement. Somewhere across town, Nathan and Victoria were probably in their honeymoon suite, celebrating the beginning of their perfect life. And I was here, alone, in pain, financially ruined, with nothing but memories of a son who'd chosen wealth and status over the woman who'd given him everything. But I'd survived. Despite everything, I'd survived. And that counted for something. 2 years passed. 2 years of barely scraping by, of constant pain, of loneliness broken only by Dot's faithful friendship. 2 years of watching Nathan and Victoria's life unfold on social media. The honeymoon in Bali, the house they bought in the most exclusive suburb, the cars, the parties, the casual displays of wealth that each felt like a knife twisting in an old wound. Nathan never reached out. Not on my birthday, not on Christmas, not on Mother's Day. It was as if I'd died on that marble floor in his penthouse, and he'd simply moved on with his life unencumbered by the inconvenience of a living mother. I learned to live with it. Not accept it, I would never accept it, but live with it. I built a small life from the ruins. My sewing business grew through word of mouth. I made friends at the community center where I taught alterations classes twice a week. I found ways to manage my pain, to work within my limitations, to survive on very little. Dot remained my anchor. She was there for every doctor's appointment, every bad pain day, every moment when the loneliness threatened to crush me. We celebrated holidays together, just the two of us, creating our own traditions. We were each other's family, bound not by blood but by the deeper ties of choice and loyalty and shared survival. "Have you heard anything from Nathan?" she'd ask occasionally, though the question became more routine than hopeful as time went on. "Nothing," I'd reply. "And I don't expect to." "You should reach out to him. Life's too short for this kind of estrangement. He knows where I live. He has my number. If he wanted to talk to me, he could pick up the phone." I'd learned to say this without emotion, like reporting the weather. But he doesn't want to. I remind him of something he'd rather forget. "What's that?" "That money and status can't erase where you came from. That he built his perfect life on his mother's sacrifice and then threw her away when she needed him." Still, sometimes late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder about him. Was he happy? Did he ever think about me? Did guilt ever keep him up at 3 a.m., or had he successfully convinced himself that what he'd done was justified? I'd never know. And gradually, I learned to be okay with not knowing. Then came October of the second year, and everything changed. I was at the community center teaching my alterations class when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to be wary of unknown numbers, which usually meant bill collectors or scammers. But something made me pick up. "Hello. Is this Margaret Morrison?" A male voice, professional and unfamiliar. "Yes. Who's calling?" "My name is Philip Chen. I'm a financial journalist with the City Tribune. I'm calling about your son, Nathan Morrison." My heart started pounding. "What about him? Are you aware that his company, Morrison Ashworth Imports, filed for bankruptcy yesterday?" The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "The company Nathan co-owned with his father-in-law, Charles Ashworth. It collapsed last week after it was revealed that they'd been involved in fraudulent import schemes. The SEC is investigating. Both Nathan and Charles are facing potential criminal charges." I sank into a chair, my students forgotten, my hands shaking. I didn't know. According to our sources, Nathan mortgaged everything to invest in the company. His house, his cars, his savings. He and his wife Victoria are reportedly completely broke. They lost everything in the bankruptcy. Philip paused. "Mrs. Morrison, I know this is difficult, but I'm writing a story about white-collar crime and its impact on families. Would you be willing to speak with me?" "No," I said automatically. "I have nothing to say. I understand this is a shock, but..." I said no. "Please don't call me again." I hung up, my mind racing. Nathan had lost everything. Bankrupt. Potentially facing criminal charges. The perfect life he'd built, the life he'd chosen over me, had crumbled to dust. And my first thought, God help me, my first thought, was good. Dot came over that evening after I called her in a panic. I showed her the news articles I'd found online, the stories about Morrison Ashworth Imports and the elaborate fraud scheme that had finally been exposed. Apparently, Nathan and Charles had been importing luxury goods and falsifying customs declarations to avoid taxes. It had been lucrative for years, but someone had blown the whistle and the whole operation had come crashing down. The company's assets were seized. Their personal assets were frozen. Nathan and Victoria had gone from millionaires to homeless in a matter of days. "He's going to call you," Dot said, reading over my shoulder. "He's going to come here asking for help." "I know. What are you going to do?" I thought about it carefully. Thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, desperate and in pain, begging her son for $2,000. Thought about the wedding that cost $250,000 while I ate ramen and rationed medication. Thought about every birthday and Christmas and Mother's Day that had passed in silence. "I'm going to close the door," I said. Just like he closed the door on me. "Maggie." "No." My voice was firm, harder than Dot had probably ever heard it. "I know what you're going to say. That I should be the bigger person, that I should forgive, that family is family. But you know what? I tried being the bigger person for 64 years. I tried sacrificing everything for family. And where did it get me? Broken, poor, and abandoned. He's still your son." "Is he?" I looked at her. Because a son wouldn't have left his mother to be paralyzed. A son wouldn't have spent $250,000 on a party while his mother sold everything she owned. A son wouldn't have ignored her for 2 years like she never existed. I shook my head. No, Dot. The son I raised died a long time ago. The person who's going to come knocking on my door is a stranger who just happens to share my DNA. She looked at me with something like sadness. When did you become so hard? The day Nathan told me his wedding was more important than my life, I replied. That's when I learned that being soft only makes you a target. Nathan showed up 3 days later. I saw him through the peephole before I opened the door, a precaution I'd learned living alone in a not great neighborhood. And for a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the polished, successful Nathan who'd floated through his engagement party. This wasn't the proud groom from the wedding photos. This was a hollow-eyed ghost of a man, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been slept in, unshaven, with the desperate energy of someone on the edge of collapse. Victoria stood beside him, and the transformation in her was even more dramatic. Gone was the perfectly coiffed, designer-clad princess. Her hair hung limp and unwashed. She wore jeans with a stain on one knee and a sweatshirt that had seen better days. Without makeup, she looked older, harder, diminished. They knocked. Soft at first, then more insistently. Mom. Mom, I know you're in there. I saw your shadow through the peephole. Please open the door. Please. We need to talk. I stood frozen, my hand on the doorknob, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Mom, please. We have nowhere else to go. Victoria's parents disowned us. All our friends disappeared. We're living in my car. Please, Mom. I'm begging you. Victoria's voice joined his, thin and whining. Margaret, please. We haven't eaten in 2 days. We just need help. Just temporarily. Just until Nathan can find another job. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Nathan's face flooded with relief. Mom, thank God. I knew you'd. No, I said. He blinked. What? No. I'm not helping you. Silence. They stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. Mom, you don't understand, Nathan started. We lost everything. The house, the cars, our savings. We're being investigated by the SEC. We could go to prison. We need. I heard what you need, I interrupted. And my answer is no. But you're my mother. The sheer audacity of that statement made me laugh, a harsh sound that surprised even me. Now I'm your mother. Now, when you need something, suddenly you remember I exist. I know I made mistakes. Mistakes? My voice rose. Is that what you call leaving me to be paralyzed because you couldn't spare $2,000? Because you had to save money for your $250,000 wedding? That's a mistake. Victoria spoke up, her voice taking on a manipulative sweetness. Margaret, we know we hurt you. We were young and stupid and caught up in the wrong things. But we've learned. We've been humbled. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us? I looked at her, really looked at her. Even broke and desperate, there was still that core of entitlement, that expectation that the world owed her something simply for existing. You want forgiveness? I asked. Here it is, I forgive you. There. You're forgiven. Now leave. Mom, wait. Nathan reached out like he was going to grab my arm. I stepped back. Don't touch me. Please, just let us in. Let us explain. Let us show you we've changed. You want to show me you've changed? Where were you 2 years ago when I was learning to walk again? Where were you on my birthday? On Christmas? Where were you during every moment of the past 2 years when you could have picked up the phone and apologized? I was ashamed, Nathan said, and tears were streaming down his face. I was ashamed of what I'd done. I didn't know how to face you. So you thought the best time to face me was when you needed money? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. I felt surprisingly calm, like I was watching this confrontation from a distance. You didn't come here to apologize. You didn't come here to make amends. You came here because you have nowhere else to go and you thought your mother would be an easy mark. You thought I'd be so pathetically grateful to have my son back in my life that I'd open my door and my wallet and my heart without question. That's not true, Nathan protested, but his eyes told a different story. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 2 years? I asked. I've been surviving. Barely. I work from home doing alterations because my back is permanently damaged and I can't stand for long periods. I eat 1 meal a day most days because that's all I can afford. I ration my pain medication because I can't afford the prescription every month. I sold everything I owned, everything, Nathan, to pay for a surgery you refused to help with. Mom, I'm sorry. And do you know the worst part? The absolute worst part? My voice cracked. I would have forgiven you. If you'd come to me any time in the past 2 years and apologized sincerely, if you'd shown even a shred of remorse, I would have forgiven you. Because that's what mothers do. We forgive the unforgivable. Hope flickered in Nathan's eyes. Then. But you didn't come. You only came now, when you need something from me. And that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Victoria's mask slipped, revealing the contempt beneath. So you're just going to leave us on the street? Your own son? My own son left me to be paralyzed, I replied. So yes, Victoria. I'm going to leave you on the street. I'm going to close this door, and I'm going to go back to my life, and you two are going to figure out your own problems just like I had to figure out mine. Mom, please. Nathan was fully sobbing now. I'm begging you. We'll do anything. We'll work, we'll pay you back, You'll what? You'll finally be the son you should have been all along. You'll suddenly develop a conscience. I shook my head. No, Nathan. You had your chance to be a good son. You had 1,000 chances. You chose differently every single time. If you do this, Victoria hissed, dropping all pretense of sweetness, you'll regret it. We'll tell everyone what kind of mother you are. Heartless. Cruel. Abandoning her own child. I smiled at her then, and it must have been a terrible smile because she actually took a step back. Go ahead, I said. Tell everyone. Post it on social media. Call the newspapers. I don't care. Because everyone who matters already knows the truth. They know I launched a GoFundMe to pay for surgery because my son wouldn't help me. They know I sold everything I owned while you were planning a $250,000 wedding. They know I've been alone and struggling while you were living in luxury. I paused, making sure they understood every word. You want to paint me as the villain? Fine. But the truth is already out there. And the truth is that I gave you everything and you threw me away. So go ahead and tell your story. I'll tell mine. We'll see which one people believe. Nathan had collapsed against the doorframe, his face in his hands. He looked broken, defeated, and part of me, the part that would always be his mother, wanted to comfort him. Wanted to pull him inside, feed him, tell him everything would be okay. But I'd learned a hard lesson. Some people will drain you dry if you let them. And love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm sorry your life fell apart. I'm sorry you're suffering. But I can't help you. I don't have the resources, and even if I did, I wouldn't. Because you need to learn the lesson I learned 2 years ago, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will fail you, and you have to find a way to survive anyway. Please, Nathan whispered one more time. Goodbye, Nathan. And I closed the door. I stood there for a moment, listening to them on the other side. Nathan's sobs. Victoria's angry muttering. Their footsteps finally retreating down the hallway, down the stairs, out of my building, out of my life. Dot emerged from the kitchen where she'd been waiting, her face wet with tears. Are you okay? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me in a year. But I did know one thing, I didn't regret it. Not even a little bit. The aftermath of closing the door on Nathan was complicated. Part of me expected to feel guilty. I'd been conditioned my whole life to put Nathan first, to sacrifice for him, To believe that being a good mother meant endless giving without expectation of return. Closing the door on him when he was desperate should have destroyed me with guilt. But it didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Free from the burden of being responsible for Nathan's happiness. Free from the expectation that I would always be there to catch him when he fell. Free from the lie that mothers owe their children everything while children owe their mothers nothing. Of course, Nathan tried other avenues. He called my phone dozens of times over the next few days. I blocked his number. He sent emails. I deleted them unread. He showed up at my apartment twice more, but I simply didn't answer the door. He tried to reach me through the community center, through my sewing clients, even through old neighbors who barely remembered me. Each time, I politely but firmly declined to engage. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was simply done. Victoria, true to her word, tried to launch a social media campaign against me. She posted long rants about heartless mothers who abandon their children in times of need. But the response wasn't what she expected. People who knew our story, and more people knew than Victoria realized, flooded her comments with the truth. They posted screenshots of my GoFundMe from 2 years ago. They shared articles about Nathan's lavish wedding. They pointed out that I'd been abandoned first, that I'd nearly been paralyzed, that Victoria herself had spent more on her wedding dress than I'd needed for life-saving surgery. The court of public opinion, it turned out, was not on Victoria's side. Within a week, she'd deleted all her posts and made her accounts private. But the damage was done. Their story was now public, and not in the way they'd hoped. Philip Chen, the journalist who'd first called me, reached out again. Mrs. Morrison, I understand you declined to comment before, but I think you should reconsider. Your story is part of a larger narrative about family dynamics, elder care, and the obligations children have to their parents. People need to hear your perspective. Why? I asked. What good would it do? Because there are thousands of mothers out there experiencing what you experienced. Being taken for granted. Being discarded when they're no longer useful. Your story gives voice to something people are afraid to talk about, that sometimes our children fail us catastrophically, and we're allowed to stop sacrificing ourselves for them. I thought about it for a long time. Thought about all the mothers in my community center group who shared similar stories in hushed voices, afraid to speak too loudly about their ungrateful children. Thought about the shame and silence that surrounded family dysfunction, the way we were all supposed to pretend everything was fine even when it was destroying us. Okay, I said finally. I'll talk to you. But I want to tell the whole story. All of it. The article ran 2 weeks later. Philip had titled it The High Cost of Unconditional Love, One Mother's Story of Sacrifice and Betrayal. He'd interviewed me extensively, and he'd been thorough. The article detailed my life as a young widow, working multiple jobs to raise Nathan. It described the engagement party, my fall, the injuries, the medical bills. It included the detail about Nathan spending $250,000 on his wedding while refusing to help with my $30,000 surgery. But Philip had also done something else. He'd tracked down medical records, with my permission, GoFundMe documentation, even interviewed some of my neighbors and friends. He'd built an irrefutable case that everything I'd said was true. He'd also interviewed Nathan, who'd apparently agreed in a desperate attempt to rehabilitate his public image. But Nathan's interview only made things worse. He'd tried to justify his actions, claiming he'd been under pressure from Victoria's family, that he'd been young and stupid, that he'd made mistakes. Philip had printed every word, and then he'd added a simple line at the end. When asked if he'd apologized to his mother at any point during the 2 years between the wedding and his bankruptcy, Nathan Morrison declined to comment. The article went viral. Within days, it had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows debated it. It became part of the national conversation about family obligations, aging parents, and the increasingly common phenomenon of adult children failing to care for the parents who sacrificed for them. I received messages from all over the country, mostly from mothers thanking me for speaking up, for giving voice to their own experiences. But I also received hate mail from people who believed mothers should forgive anything, should always prioritize their children, should never set boundaries no matter how badly they were treated. I read every message, both positive and negative, and I realized something. I'd become a symbol. Not by choice, but by circumstance. I represented every mother who'd been taken for granted, every parent who'd sacrificed endlessly only to be discarded. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable and strangely empowering. 3 months after the article was published, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered through the mail. The return address was an apartment complex on the other side of the city, in a neighborhood I recognized as barely better than my own. The handwriting was Nathan's. I held the letter for a long time before opening it, debating whether to read it or throw it away unread. Dot, who'd been with me when it arrived, watched silently. "What do you think it says?" she asked. "I don't know. Another plea for help. Probably. Or maybe an angry rant about how I destroyed his life by talking to that journalist. Are you going to read it?" "I don't know." But even as I said it, I was already opening the envelope. The letter was 6 pages long, written in Nathan's careful handwriting. I read it through once, then again, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't what I'd expected. "Dear Mom, I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect forgiveness, or reconciliation, or anything at all. I'm writing this because my therapist says I need to acknowledge what I've done, take responsibility for it, and make amends where possible. Even if those amends are never accepted. I've been going to therapy twice a week for the past 2 months. It's free therapy through a community program, which is all I can afford now. Victoria and I are separated. She moved back in with her parents after they finally agreed to take her in, though they've made it clear they've disowned me completely. I live in a studio apartment in Riverside, work 2 jobs, and spend most of my free time trying to understand how I became the person who could abandon his mother. The therapist asks me a lot of questions I don't know how to answer. When did you start prioritizing wealth over people? When did you decide your mother's life was worth less than your social status? How did you justify it to yourself? I didn't have good answers. I still don't. But I've been thinking about it constantly, replaying every decision, every moment, trying to understand. I think it started long before the engagement party. It started when I got my first high-paying job and felt, for the first time in my life, like I wasn't poor anymore. Like I'd escaped something. And you, Mom, represented everything I was trying to escape. The struggle, the sacrifice, the constant awareness of not having enough. When I met Victoria and her family, I saw a different kind of life. Easy. Comfortable. Where money wasn't something you worried about, it was just something you had. And I wanted that so badly I was willing to do anything to keep it. Including forgetting where I came from. Including forgetting who made it possible for me to even have a chance at that life. When you fell at the engagement party, my first thought, God, I'm ashamed to admit this, my first thought wasn't concern for you. It was annoyance that you were disrupting the evening. That you were embarrassing me in front of Victoria's family. And when the doctor said you needed surgery, when she said it would cost $30,000, I panicked. Not because I didn't have the money, I did. But because spending it on you meant sacrificing some of what Victoria and I had planned. It meant the wedding would be smaller, less impressive, less likely to cement my position in her family's social circle. So I told myself lies. I told myself you'd figure it out. That you'd find another way. That it wasn't really as serious as the doctors said. That you were being dramatic, asking for too much. I told myself these lies because believing them was easier than facing the truth, that I'd become someone who valued status more than his own mother's health. That I'd sold my soul for a penthouse and a designer wedding, and the price was you. The wedding was beautiful. Everyone said so. It was perfect in every way, the exact fairy tale Victoria had dreamed of. But I couldn't enjoy it, Mom. Every expensive detail reminded me of what I'd refused to spend on you. Every toast about family and love felt like an accusation. I should have called you then. Should have apologized, made it right. But I was in too deep. I'd made my choice, and acknowledging I'd chosen wrong would mean facing who I'd become. So I doubled down. I told myself you were fine, that you'd handled it, that staying away was better than confronting my guilt. 2 years. 2 years I let pass without speaking to you. 2 years of birthdays and holidays where I saw your name in my contacts and felt a twist of guilt and then pushed it away. 2 years of telling myself someday I'd reach out, someday I'd fix it, someday when I wasn't so busy, when things calmed down, when I found the courage. And then everything fell apart. The business, the money, the life I'd sacrificed you for, all of it gone. And suddenly I was back where I started, desperate and broke and with nowhere to turn. Except I wasn't back where I started. Because when I started, I had you. And now I had nothing. When I showed up at your door, I told myself I was coming to apologize. To make amends. But you saw through me immediately. You saw that I'd only come because I needed something. That my apology was conditional on you helping me. And you were right to close the door. I want you to know that. You were right. I didn't deserve your help. I didn't deserve your forgiveness. I didn't deserve anything from you except exactly what you gave me, the same abandonment I gave you. The article that journalist wrote destroyed what little reputation I had left. People I barely knew felt comfortable telling me what they thought of me. I lost job interviews when employers Googled my name. Old friends blocked me. Strangers stopped me on the street to tell me what a terrible person I was. And every word was deserved. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation or another chance. I just need you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did to you. I understand the pain I caused, the betrayal, the abandonment. I understand that spending $250,000 on a wedding while you sold everything you owned to avoid paralysis is unforgivable. I understand that ignoring you for 2 years while you struggled alone is unforgivable. I understand that only coming back when I needed something is unforgivable. I understand that some wounds are too deep to heal, some betrayals too complete to overcome. You deserved a better son. You deserved someone who honored your sacrifice, who protected you in your vulnerability, who put you first at least once after you put him first for 30 years. I wasn't that son. And I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I know how to express. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person. Not for you. I've lost the right to do anything for you. But for myself, so that I can live with what I've done. So that maybe someday I can look at myself without feeling crushing shame. I don't expect to hear from you. I don't expect you to care about my redemption or growth or any of it. You've moved on, built a life without me, and you should keep doing that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. The full horror of what I did. And I'm sorry. Your son, Nathan. I set the letter down with shaking hands. Dot had been reading over my shoulder, and I felt her hand on my back. What do you think? She asked quietly. I think. I had to stop and swallow hard. I think he means it. This time, I think he actually means it. So what are you going to do? Nothing, I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. I'm going to do nothing. Nothing. He doesn't want a response. He said so in the letter. He's trying to grow, to become better, and that's good. That's what he needs to do. But I don't need to be part of that process. Don't you want closure? I have closure, I replied, gesturing at the letter. This is closure. Knowing that he understands what he did, that he's taking responsibility, that he's not making excuses or expecting me to fix him, that's all the closure I need. But if he's really changed, then I'm happy for him. I meant it. I genuinely hope he becomes a better person. I hope he learns from this and never treats anyone the way he treated me. But that doesn't mean I need to have him in my life. His growth is his journey. Mine is mine. And my journey doesn't include mothering him anymore. Dot looked at me with something like wonder. When did you get so wise? I laughed. I'm not wise. I'm just exhausted. I spent 64 years trying to be enough for someone who didn't value me. I don't have the energy to do it anymore, even if he's changed. Especially if he's changed, because then I'll be tempted to go back, to give him another chance, to restart that whole cycle. And you don't want that. I want peace, I said simply. I want my little life with my sewing business and my community center classes and my friends who actually show up for me. I want to wake up without dread, go to bed without resentment. I want to be Margaret, not just Nathan's mother. So the letter doesn't change anything. The letter changes everything, I corrected. It means I can stop wondering if he understands what he did. It means I can stop carrying the weight of his ignorance. But it doesn't change what I need, which is to continue living my life without him in it. I put the letter in a drawer, next to all the other documentation I'd kept over the years. Evidence of what happened. Proof that I wasn't crazy or vindictive or cruel. Just a mother who'd finally learned to protect herself. A year passed after Nathan's letter. A year in which I didn't respond, didn't reach out, didn't change my mind. I heard through the grapevine, the way you always hear things in a city where everyone's connected by 6 degrees of separation, that Nathan was doing okay. He'd kept his 2 jobs, stayed in therapy, even started volunteering at a non-profit that helped low-income families with financial literacy. Victoria had divorced him, remarried someone from her old social circle, and apparently pretended her brief marriage to Nathan had never happened. Nathan never tried to contact me again. True to his word in the letter, he left me alone to live my life. And I did live. My sewing business grew. I hired 2 other women, both survivors of different struggles, both needing flexible work and understanding employers. We formed a little collective, taking on bigger projects, building a reputation for quality and fairness. The community center asked me to expand my classes. I taught alterations on Tuesdays and Thursdays, pattern making on Saturdays. My students were mostly other women like me, older, overlooked, needing something to do with their hands and hearts. We formed friendships, created a network of support and shared skills. I even started dating. Sort of. Harold from the senior center asked me to dinner, and I said yes more out of surprise than interest. But Harold was kind and funny and had his own sad story about children who'd disappointed him. We went to dinner once a week, nothing serious, just companionship and conversation and the pleasant realization that life wasn't over at 65. Dot remained my closest friend, my chosen family. We'd survived so much together that nothing could shake our bond. We celebrated our own holidays, took day trips on the bus to nearby towns, sat together in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. My back still hurt. Some days were worse than others. But I'd learned to manage it, to work with my limitations instead of fighting them. The pain was part of me now, a permanent reminder of everything I'd survived. I was happy. Not ecstatically, not perfectly, but genuinely happy in a quiet, sustainable way that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence.